the distinct honor to introduce to you the American people a new scientific frontier with a raw power like LIM technology in the good hands of true patriots like Dr. Ophelia Turner. The potential is limitless. On this day, we welcome our Faraday future.
The year is 1955. Dr. Ophelia Turner is standing next to President Koch, the top of her head barely clearing his shoulder. She stands, stiff-backed, her hazel eyes affixed on the glass and steel chamber in front of her. She does not appear to breathe until a ball of light appears out of thin air. The sight is tremendous, a lightning bolt frozen mid-strike, and the reaction immediate. The gathering audience roars with excitement and spontaneous applause. On Dr. Turner, only a tightening of her lips indicates that she hears the audience at all. Dr. Turner and President Koch pose for a picture, and she does not smile even then. That picture is the image splashed across newspapers and science journals for the next decade. The mother of LIM technology, they called her, the angel of a new age. The newspapers at that time laid the titles on thick while peddling the impending utopia. Then she recedes into the bowels of a government research facility. She's never seen again in public. There are scant appearances here and there in blink and you miss it promotional videos and blatant propaganda fodder, and then she and the promise of LIM technology disappear. The press coverage of LIM technology is bright-eyed and bushy-tailed at first. In the decade between 1955 to 1965, LIM is called many things: the promise of the future, the herald of a new age, then never spoken of again. You don't have to dig very deep for the gaps in the story to emerge. The presidential demonstration is the only physical proof we ever see of it. Compared to the Manhattan Project, developed under airtight shroud of secrecy, why was LIM paraded around in the papers? And if it really was the technological quantum leap to answer all our wildest dreams, why did it blink out of existence? The story of LIM technology is one hell of a maze, and the key to it is a woman named Dr. Ophelia Turner. Did Ophelia Turner, by all measure a failed physicist as far as her public record goes, truly invent LIM technology? Or was she held up as a Rosie the Riveter for the Cold War? An atomic Annie to excite the masses during the no-holds-barred race against the Soviet Union? Was she a myth, martyr, or monster? A figment of the imagination? True savior? Or a convenient scapegoat? I'm Chiaki Saruhashi, and in this 9-part series, I aim to find out. Welcome back. This is Frequency File, Episode 2. In the last episode, I told you about the curious case of Dr. Ophelia Turner. When it comes to this enigmatic individual, one of 3 versions is true: myth, martyr, or monster. To be able to weigh her in turns as heretic, genius, or scapegoat, we must first set the stage. When I started down this path to discover who she was, what she did, and ultimately what happened to her, I didn't expect it to lead me to one of the strangest mysteries of the Pacific Northwest, the Olympic Exclusion Zone. But let me rewind a bit. In northwest Washington state, there are 3,600 square miles of vibrant wilderness called the Olympic Peninsula. Bounded by water on 3 sides, it was a wonderland for outdoorsy types, with snow-capped mountains and salmon-bearing rivers and pristine rainforests. Up until 1955, it was the residence of 100,000 people, including Ophelia Turner. It was her birthplace, her hometown, and, it turns out, ground zero and sacrificial lamb for the promise of LIM technology. In true fashion, the government never comes out and says that's what led to the creation of the Olympic Exclusion Zone. But the chain of events were in plain sight. Strange accidents, leading to the government's claim of eminent domain and subsequent seizure of the peninsula. The evacuation of 100,000 people and the attempt and abject failure at containing the rumors that spread like wildfire. Because it turns out, even with the government's resources at your disposal, keeping secrets is a tricky business. You can bet there was plenty of talk as a result. Lucky me, because I had plenty of questions. Here's what we know. Over 50 years ago, in November of 1946, Dr. Ophelia Turner was 27. She had recently returned home to the Olympic Peninsula to lick her wounds after a failed stint in academia. In a fit of obsession or redemption, or quite frankly, both, she cobbled together a laboratory in her basement and produced the first limb wave on nothing but a killer hunch and plain ingenuity. Or so the story goes. It's never clearly stated anywhere what limb waves and limb technology really were. It's all vague claims and wild theories, dreams that border more on the mystical than the scientific. What we do know is that limb stood for unlimited frequency. Radio waves, once souped up and modulated just right, supposedly enabled the control of matter in a way that modern science, both back then and now, could only dream of. After Dr. Turner's discovery, she and a few friends, scientists and PhDs all, toyed with Lim in their garage labs for about 4 years. The local police and fire departments start making regular house calls, spurred on by increasingly disgruntled neighbors calling in about incidents that seem to grow larger and more disturbing as the years go on. After one too many reports, the federal government takes notice and thus begins their severe interest in limb technology. The next part happens quickly. In 1955, the United States government seizes not only the physical area where Dr. Turner and her scientists live, but the entire concept of limb technology. The area is at first evacuated under the pretense of safety, but quickly commandeered by the government. They establish a brand new department called ARDA, Advanced Resonance Development Authority, which was to be headed by Dr. Turner herself. Over the next 15 years, the government expands the zone's borders. They clear out civilians as they go and erect massive 500-meter walls to keep out an increasingly curious public. The zone started in the northernmost tip of the peninsula, then expanded outward twice. Once in 1961, again in 1967, to the outer perimeter we see now. After the multi-stage evacuation of the Olympic Peninsula's 100,000 strong population, the records get sketchy. Once the region is swept clean of civilian eyes, the flow of information trickles to an eventual stop. ARDA has always maintained that the evacuation was done in the name of national security, that there was simply nothing more patriotic than sacrificing your homes, with the communists plotting our demise across the Atlantic. Certainly not because there was any danger from the strange experiments happening inside, or situations most unnatural to witness. ARDA kept a wide berth, displacing citizens far ahead of the front line, so first-hand accounts of things going awry were rare. But rumors spread fast, and everyone had some story about a distant relative whose pet changed in inexplicable ways, or a friend of a friend who followed strange lights into the woods and never returned. Once the civilians cleared out, the ARDA employees moved in. Scientists, officials, support staff, and their families made the Olympic exclusion zone home, reaching anywhere from 300 to 1,000 in total at its peak. What any of them were doing in the zone was kept hush hush, but the population just outside the walls found the secrecy irresistible. Every shipment of raw material, out of season weather pattern, and inexplicable light or sound became the talk of the town for the first decade of the zone's existence. Sadly, that's about where the cold, hard facts end. Listeners, I tried. I really did. I started my investigation in the usual fashion, digging up every piece of public record I could get. The paperwork is maddeningly typical up until 1955. Census records, soil samples, weather reports, hand-drawn survey maps, the beginnings of satellite photos, all readily available for anyone with the patience to walk themselves into a county office. But those materials don't tell me much, and I quickly am forced to turn to more dubious sources. Before the downing of multiple passenger planes and the subsequent establishment of the no-fly zone in 1962, crude aerial photos are taken and circulated. This is where things get interesting. I find fuzzy shots of what appears to be entire mountains relocating overnight, buildings disappearing and reappearing at random, and lakes filled with water or light, depending on the time of day. The resolution is dubious, making them inkblot tests in their own right. They are the stuff of dreams among amateur investigators and conspiracy theorists alike. The most outlandish, improbable, and extremely unverifiable stories came from breachers, people rumored to have jumped, tunneled, hot air ballooned their way through the walls. If they're to be believed, there is much to be uncovered. But more on that later. LIM technology is not paraded around in the press for long. As the government withdraws acknowledgement that it ever existed, the public's interest similarly begins to wane. The last verifiable activity is an exodus of ARDA employees from the zone, beginning in 1981 and followed swiftly by a full decommissioning of the zone in 1987. After which, those 3,600 square miles are sealed away and left behind with no explanation. A tomb, minutes away from the populous, perfectly normal city of Seattle, with decades of history and secrets locked inside. And that is where I'm left to fill in the enormous, ill defined gaps. So that's the history of the Olympic exclusion zone. We know it absolutely existed and that something blighted the area. Dr. Ophelia Turner was a real person who grew up there, and LIM technology, claimed to be her invention, was the reason the zone was created. The facts point to either the pursuit of LIM or the technology itself doing something terrible to the area, and maybe even to the people who stayed behind. For such a vast, valuable area as the Olympic Peninsula to be lost to the world for the indefinite future, someone needed to take the fall. The evidence in this corner paints the target square on the martyr part of this equation. Or did Dr. Ophelia Turner know what she was unleashing upon her homeland? If she did it willingly, then she would have been a monster. But if the government strong armed her into it, then she would have had no choice but to become a martyr. To answer that question, we need more information still. How do you force 100,000 people out of their homes without facing major resistance? Even if you're the United States government, facing down what's being peddled as the greatest threat our nation has ever faced, the answer is you don't. This is Frequency File, Episode 3, The Human Cost. Last episode, I reported all the cold, hard facts I could get my hands on. If you missed that episode, here's the summary. There wasn't much. Now, we jump tracks to the stories of the people, to knit together old records and eyewitness accounts to form some fabric of the true story. Whoever's job it was at ARDA to suppress stories did a really good job. What they did to keep that sheer number of people from talking, and then to smear the stories that did come out, was a masterstroke of obfuscation. Unfortunately for ARDA, the cases that made it all the way to court became public record. And the facts were these. ARDA played nice at first with a generous relocation package. They offered cold, hard cash and built sprawling housing complexes in nearly every state to resettle the former residents. These new communities were built as idyllic, white picket fenced neighborhoods where you were sure to be surrounded by all American families who shared your same values, while enjoying the benefits of government subsidized grocery stores, school districts, and manicured public parks. Not a bad deal from the looks of things. When it came to the holdouts, the people who wouldn't leave for any amount, things got ugly. But in the end, the government won out, as it always does. And while the government has the sovereign right to seize private property, the Fifth Amendment mandates just compensation be paid for it. But it doesn't specify when or how this compensation be made, and many dissenters ended up with nothing through good old loopholes and bureaucracy, some of whom are still pursuing their claims to this day. But the chilling thing is, those left with empty pockets consider themselves lucky. There's a saying they mutter amongst themselves under their breath that at least they had the luck to not live in Sierram. Of the witnesses to the Sierram disaster that are still alive, most aren't willing to speak to me, but one eyewitness account remains the most damning report of what happened. Meet Lou Arganza. She was 9 when she last saw her parents alive. You were born in the zone.
Yes, born and raised in Sierra Town until it wasn't a town anymore.
Lou was evacuated from the zone on February 13th, 1973. Can you share what you remember from that day?
Sure. I was at a week-long wilderness camp, this yearly thing my elementary school would put on. They'd throw the kids into the woods, show us how to pick apart animal droppings and sketch birds, things like that. It was my favorite thing as a kid. But that year, I really didn't want to go. Something called the Limb Fair was coming to Sierram, and I begged my dad to let me stay. He told me I could see it the following year. Well, that obviously didn't happen.
The Limb Fair. Arda advertised it as a good old-fashioned small-town get-together, a miniature world fair of sorts for the hardworking government employees and their families that lived in Sierram Town. The flyers and brochures I've gotten my hands on promised all manner of things, mundane and fantastical. Kiss your low-tech washing machine goodbye. Take home this limb nebulizer and zap your clothes and diapers clean. Why break your back trimming your lawn when LimTech can transform your grass into something more? This push to get LimTech into the homes of zone residents, housewives in particular, was a deliberate and strategic move. The cynical reason, and most popular interpretation, is that it was a PR push to rehabilitate LimTech's image. By 1973, there'd been enough reports of radioactive fallout and inexplicable disappearances that suspicion of what Arda was doing was high. Where were you when the Sierram incident happened?
At base camp about 20 miles out of town. The sirens went off during dinner, and we barely had time to wonder whether it was a drill or real before the shockwave rolled through. Luckily, we'd been through the disaster procedure days before. We dove under our tables to take cover. We were just kids, and at first thrilled for the drama unfolding in real time. It was hours before Arda came to extract us. By that time, we'd scrambled up onto a hill to signal for help and saw the
Take your time.
It's been 20 years, and I still can't go anywhere near a county fair of any sort.
What did they tell you had happened?
Nothing. They were all business, hurrying us onto the trucks with boarded-up windows. We weren't even allowed back in our cabins to pack our belongings. They breezed us out of the zone. It wasn't until days later, when most of us were deposited in an orphanage, that we learned that our parents died.
Lou's account is one of the most damning and holds up to the best of my verification efforts. She's told that story many times and hadn't changed this story in the ensuing years. Chalk it up to good memory or deeply seated trauma, but it is, as far as I can tell, real. The stories from others, however, inspire a healthy dose of skepticism. Those who weren't too scared of government retaliation were few. And the ones who shared their stories loved their 15 minutes of fame a little too much. Any talk show or gossip rag or cheap date willing to listen heard from these types and made piecing together the zone's true history for someone like me, decades later, a migraine-inducing experience. Because these stories, as every good gossip knows, morphed over time. What started as the most powerful lightning storms recorded on Earth turned into UFOs touching down. An innocent spiderweb became something to be avoided on pain of death. A grassy lawn, left untended, became a feeding ground for something called burp bunnies. The tales became taller as the years went by. And the more I heard, the more my suspension of disbelief left me. And while the Sierram disaster was only one of the many incidents that occurred over the zone's 32-year history, it is the one I return to as a prime example. Whatever happened there in Sierram is the type of disaster that caused the creation of the exclusion zone in the first place. We can extrapolate from what little we know of what happened here. If this is the one story to get out, how many more horrors did LIM technology cause? Finally, back to the question of Ophelia Turner. The fact is, most of the people I spoke to didn't know her. How is it that the supposed inventor of LIM technology herself, who ostensibly led the ARDA R&D project, wasn't known across the board? It's almost as if the American public knew her more than the people who worked and lived in the zone, thanks to the PR machine. But how does that all balance out? The best I could get were vague acknowledgments, mainly from scientists. Mind you, this lot was also the most tight-lipped, but those who showed a hint of recollection spoke of her as if she were an urban legend herself.
I mean, I heard her name from time to time. Never saw her once, though.
I don't remember an Ophelia. Oh, but there was an Alan Turner who was heavily involved in LIM R&D. Not a lot of women in the labs. I would have noticed one for sure.
Curiouser and curiouser. Researching Ophelia Turner's story feels like poking around the edges of a void. When I look directly at my subject, nothing appears to be there. But as I tease around the edges, a shape begins to emerge in the null space. It is with great journalistic integrity that I began to define those edges. But even then, it's tempting to fill in the spaces with good old-fashioned imagination. But hey, I knew what I was signing up for when I decided to unearth a decades-old mystery. Welcome back. This is episode 4 of Frequency File. In lieu of no one having a personal account of Ophelia Turner, we turn to more facts in the periphery. In this episode, I dig into ARDA, the government agency behind the research and development of LIM technology, as well as the scant facts of LIM technology itself. Bear with me as we depart the shores of known, connected facts and slingshot from one theory to another. By now, you're probably starting to gather what the problem was with the very concept of LIM technology. The rumors about LIM were healthy and far-reaching, that it could solve world hunger and overpopulation, that it had alchemical powers to convert matter from one form to another, or would finally plug the technological gap needed to realize the long-dreamed-of perpetual energy machines. Even for the scientifically disinclined like myself, it's easy to conclude that no one technology could fulfill all of mankind's wildest fantasies. And yet, here was LIM technology, promising all those things in one swoop. And remember, any and all actual scientific detail about LIM technology was kept absolutely airtight. Every schematic, lab note, and mathematical proof that was allegedly smuggled out of the zone or recreated from memory was dissected by experts around the world. All were found to be well outside the realm of reality. And those scattered claims of rogue LIM technology out in the world, they were all red herrings, nothing proven. So, what do all those rumors about LIM technology leave us with? The most popular theory by far was that LIM technology never existed. An elaborate yarn spun by opportunists to siphon government funds into their pockets. The demonstration from Dr. Ophelia Turner and President Koch was well within the ability of an amateur magician. And once again, Dr. Turner's lack of accomplishments in her academic career paint an easy portrait of a scientist eager for a win. That would slot Dr. Turner firmly in the myth camp. We may never be able to agree on what LIM was, or if it even existed, but we can certainly understand why its existence was necessary. The state of the world that existed needed to believe in something so fantastical. Here's my submission to the ever-growing theory pile. It is no coincidence that the year the zone was established was 1955. That year also marked the start of the space race. For that next decade, there is no hotter topic, no singular focus of effort and funding than beating the Soviets. With Sputnik's launch in 1957, followed by Gagarin's first brush with space in 1961, America fell behind with every passing year. Its desperation only increased with the very public explosion of Project Vanguard, America's first satellite launch attempt. And then, to go from not being able to get off the launch pad to 6 years later being the first to land a man on the moon, that is a whole lot of technological progress to make from a losing position. The timing of LIM technology couldn't have been more perfect. The government springs into action, promoting LIM while being simultaneously effusive and evasive, an American political specialty. The live demonstrations are few, the vagaries plenty, but there is a notable wave of professors vacating their spots at major universities to take on positions at ARDA. Some interesting fields of study from the bunch: experts in crop domestication, enclosed biological ecosystems, and radiobiology. What sounds like a child's tale begins to take on a shape that fits cleanly with the race to the stars. I will reiterate here, this is only my theory, but I dare say it's a good one. The problem we've come to understand is that something went so horribly wrong inside the zone's borders and caused all of it, LIM, disasters, and the rest, to be hermetically sealed off forever. As dubious as the fuzzy photos and inconsistent stories were, they add up to one thing. What was going on in the zone wasn't normal. For as tall as Arda built those walls, they couldn't hide oddly colored auroras in the sky, or ice storms in the summer, or localized hurricane-force winds compacted into tight columns. There were two words that popped up time and time again within these eyewitness stories: instability and anomalies. I've been able to distill a few things about them: that they were two of the many, many unfortunate byproducts of the R&D going on in the zone. The government was forced to admit to elevated levels of radiation. Pretty hard to cover that one up, as it became a tourist attraction to hike along the walls with a Geiger counter. But this instability seemed to be some combination of ecological and physical fallout. Some described it as a state of constant landslides. Others recounted storms unlike anything seen on planet Earth. As far as what the anomalies were, I couldn't tell you. I ran face first into two distinct responses to that question. Either people refused to say a single word about them, or people had too many conflicting explanations to find a single thread of commonality. Perhaps that's a topic for a series all on its own. Roblox at every turn with this story. This is Frequency File, Episode 5. By this point in my investigation, the unanswered questions kept piling up. The depths I was having to go to, the mysteries upon mysteries, was making me dizzy. Many times, my hope dwindled. Was I getting anywhere with this? Or were the rumors sweeping me completely off track? One night, in a fit of desperation, I opened my reader mail and found the motivation to continue. And I thought, you're walking this same journey with me. And maybe you share some of my frustrations about all the non-answers. So indulge me this one episode as I lighten the mood and talk about the response to my work. A quick behind the scenes on the making of Frequency File. It was quite the uphill battle to make it to air. Only by virtue of my good work investigating the case of the disappearing banana slugs was this entire series allowed to happen. And I was made aware in no uncertain terms that I used up the entirety of my good karma on making this. But the calls and letters from you, the listeners, have managed to overwhelm the network, and thus have justified my obsession-turned-legit investigation. So, as thanks, this episode is all about you. Your theories, your hopes and dreams, your love and hate, your opinions. I've sifted through the hundreds of letters and calls, and here's a selection of the sentiment you've shared.
I've listened to every one of your episodes and I did my own research. And I have to say, there is no chance in hell that Ophelia Turner invented limb technology. She was 100% a convenient excuse. I mean, for starters, she's a woman. As an American, who would you rather rally around? Some dweeb scientist squinting at a test tube? Or a woman in a lab coat posing for pretty pictures? Admit it, we were duped by the government. Again. When will we learn?
You're wrong about one thing, huh? Some limb technology did make it out into the larger world. Oh, you remember the personal cassette players that were all the rage in 1979? Yeah. That thing we all begged our parents for Christmas? Slim tech, baby. Go on. Open it up. Tell me if you don't see some limb doohickeys in there, huh? I dare you.
What I don't understand is how they could let all those zone people back out into the world. Like, they lived there, were experimented on, and got exposed to Lord knows what. And they just rolled out the red carpet for them and let them loose. Oh, that's just completely irresponsible. My neighbor, they were one of them. And let me tell you, nothing good came from it. The minute they moved in, things got screwy. You ever hear of an ice storm in Tampa? Well, heck, in Florida, anywhere. No. But they move in, and suddenly we get freak ice storms and armies of six-legged possums overrunning the neighborhood. Well, I can't sleep a single night without hearing their grubby little hands, so many little hands, going through my trash bins. My husband tried to fight them off and got bitten. And he ain't been right since. I tell you, they're out there, and it's already too late.
Hello? I haven't been able to sleep since I first started listening to Frequency File. I've been putting the clues together, and I honestly think my grandparents are Alan and Ophelia Turner. They never like talking about their past, but sometimes I'll sneak up to the attic and find photos of them in these weird lab outfits. And what's more, sometimes when they talk in their sleep, they speak another language. I bet it's Russian. You have to check it out.
And the most surprising of the messages.
Don't keep poking your nose around where it doesn't belong. You're not gonna like where you end up. Trust me, I should know.
He identifies himself as Ed Baker, an astronaut on the American spaceflight missions.
Now, this isn't a threat. It's just a warning. I went up with the third landing mission. All was well. Readings were nominal. We achieved stable orbit around the moon and began executing the limb-assisted landing procedure. Once it activated, that's when everything went wrong. I wish I could tell you what I saw. I wish I could put it into words. But most of all, I wish I could forget. I don't even look up at the sky anymore. Every night is a terror. Limb technology was a mistake. It wasn't worth it. I mean, yes, we won the race, but the cost was too great. It will always be there, waiting for our next mistake.
Okay, well, maybe that didn't do quite the job of lightening the mood, but knowing that there's so many of you along for the ride with me gives me the determination to continue on, no matter how deep this rabbit hole goes. So thank you, and I'll see you next episode.
Hello? This is a message for Chiaki Saruhashi. We have some documents that may be of interest to you.
They'll be dropped at it's gonna be the Seattle Public Library Central District Branch at 11:59 p.m.
Sorry, who is this?
Consider it a present from the Breachers.
This is Frequency File, Episode 6. Listeners, I'm ashamed to admit the difficulty I had at this point in my investigation. I was out of leads, shamelessly mired in rumors and dead ends, and pretty darn stressed about what to do next. So this phone call offers me a lead on a cold, stormy night, and in all my posturing about journalistic integrity and triple-checking the evidence, I am amused to say that this is the sketchiest source I've come across in my career. And yet, it led me somewhere. I get this call on a Friday night, and I only have enough time to hop in a cab to make the drop. Waiting for me next to the library's book return are 3 filing boxes stuffed with moldy documents. They are in poor shape. I tip the cab driver extra after the bottom of a box disintegrates all over his trunk. Clearly, these records were not well taken care of. I wonder if this is more of a decluttering of a long-lost basement rather than an illicit sharing of secrets. And yet, in the soggy pages, I do find proof of Ophelia Turner's position. A series of organization charts of the LIM Research Project spanning the first 10 years of R&D. In the earliest version of the chart, she's positioned at the top level with the title of lab director. The subsequent charts show a rapid expansion of the project, with hundreds of names being added, as well as a good deal of shuffling. Dr. Turner's job title changes every 2 years, and a quick visual comparison shows that she is quickly and literally being shoved off into her own corner. The years that this is seen happening correlate to the downturn in her PR appearances. Another name appears briefly on the organization chart. You guessed it, Alan Turner. A quick search in the county office shows that he's Ophelia's husband. Married at 22, no children on record, died in 1961. The cause of death is unlisted, which means only one thing. The government scrubbed it from the record. Okay, so not only did Ophelia Turner exist, she was one of the highest-ranking members on the LIM Research Project. And she was intimately involved with these so-called anomalies. Did she create them? Did she dissect them? Did she unleash them onto her homeland like some sort of mad scientist? Did I need to stop drinking coffee after 8 p.m. in my desperate bid to meet my deadlines for this series? Lots of questions I couldn't possibly know the answers to. But one good lead follows another, and soon I get another phone call. More on the next episode of Frequency File.
You did good. We can meet.
This is Frequency File, Episode 7. Apparently, I passed some sort of test with my impromptu retrieval of moldy documents. I was rewarded with a connection to Richard Phillips, a man who claimed to not only have worked in the zone, but stayed there years after its closure. We meet at a cafe in downtown Seattle.
The zone, in its active research and development phase, doesn't look too dissimilar to these photos you've got there. By now it's been, 20 years abandoned, but being hermetically sealed in with 70 petabecquerels of radiation has got its benefits. When the withdrawal orders came through, everything was left as is. Except for the ones who didn't leave, like me.
Why did you stay?
See, that was always the question, wasn't it? We all had our own reasons. Some of the scientists in particular like to claim legitimate reasons for staying behind. But we were, we were all misguided. We all had something we were running from.
How long were you there?
I want to say about 6 years after the decommission was complete.
But if ARDA withdrew all operations, how did you survive? Like, what did you eat? How did you get the supplies you needed?
Some zone secrets are best left secret. You don't want to know. And it wasn't pretty, the things we had to do to survive. But it was quiet. Blissfully, peacefully quiet.
No, I want all the dirty secrets. What you ate, how your plumbing worked, what social activities there were.
Social activities. No one went in there to have a good time, I'll tell you that. There was plenty of chatter across the radio at first, but that died down pretty quickly. Not too much to gossip about after being shut in for... I don't even know how many years at that point.
Radio, like a ham radio?
Yeah, but worlds more sophisticated. Some property of radio waves made it the only consistent method of transmission. So it was our prime method of communication. People started up their own radio stations, made their own programming. Didn't matter who was listening, it was the human need to talk that we were fulfilling.
Okay, but give me a little hint. You weren't completely deprived of supplies, right?
Oh, easy. That's where the breachers came in.
On the next episode of Frequency File, more about the breachers and what they thought of our topic at hand. Dr. Ophelia Turner.